Why was it called the Caprivi, and why is it such an odd thing? Because if you look, most countries are very irregular shape, but this has got this strange thing sticking into it. Comes back from colonial era, when the Germans and the British and the French and the Belgians were fighting over all the resources in Africa. So the British, being their normal colonial selves, had dominated all the good areas. The Germans came a bit later and took what was left, and the French were in the middle, well, doing whatever the French do, which we're never really sure. But the Germans had secured Tanzania on the east coast and Southwest Africa, as they called it, on the west coast. Meanwhile, the British had gone strategically. They'd got Kenya, Botswana, which was then called Buchananland, Zimbabwe, and the Congo area. So they'd captured all the central area. And the Germans realized that they needed to get supplies from one side of the continent to the other. Meanwhile, the British, on the eastern side of Africa, wanted a naval base down the east coast. So they wanted an island called Zanzibar Island, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Beautiful island, beautiful to go on holiday now. It's an island off the coast of Tanzania, but the Germans ruled Tanzania. Now, the Germans then did a lot of research up and down and found that the only way from Southwest Africa across the continent was this fine strip of land here to go inland, because all the rest of the area south is either floodplains, which you couldn't cross, or desert, or mountains. So they did a lot of research, and on that coast they found, on that bit of geography, they found that this was a non-flooded raised bit of land that could access Central Africa. So they thought they were onto a winner there, because they could go across there and connect up with Tanzania. The British, on the other hand, already knew that there was this small thing across here called Victoria Falls. But they didn't tell the Germans that. So they bargained with the Germans, and the German Chancellor was von Caprivi, to swap Zanzibar Island for this stretch of land. And the Germans thought they were getting a really good deal, because they got the only access into Central Africa from the west, and they would be able to join up with Tanzania. Meanwhile, the British knew that as soon as they got there and tried going further down, they would get stuck. Because there's not only Victoria Falls, you've also got Kariba and a lot of other blocks in the way before they could connect through. But the British, of course, being very honest, didn't tell them, did the deal because they wanted Zanzibar, and that actually changed the dynamics of rule in Africa, because British naval then ruled the east coast, which then built up part of the British Empire and cut off the Germans from supply to each other, and that's why the Germans faded out of Africa. So it was quite a turning point in history, and the guy who got this land, and ironically he got a very high award for getting it, and then he got disgraced because they couldn't do anything with it. So it is a very interesting piece of land, both historically but also geologically and geographically. It is very unique for many reasons in the whole world. But that's how it got its name. Nowadays, because General von Caprivi was a German chancellor who ruled over a colonial power, and they're moving away from names, they've actually changed the names of the area to divide it into two. So you now have, so generically this is referred to as the Caprivi Strip. But now from this, that line here, this section here, is called the Kavango region. And that's because the Okavango River runs down here and into the delta. So that's the Okavango. And this is called the Zambezi region because this river down here is the Zambezi that flows into this area and then over Victoria Falls.